Thanks, everyone. We'll be starting our next session, which is the final session for the day. The topic is Actuarial General Intelligence, exploring the potential implications of large language models on actuarial education and learning. Our presenter for today is Max Popescu. Thanks, Max.
Thanks very much. So it's just me. Francois is not here. He did help with the paper itself. Well, it's not a paper, it's a presentation. It's not very technical, so hopefully you'll be able to understand it very easily. And I'm hoping that you have some views that you can share with me as well. I'm not sure when the Q&A questions are going to go up onto the app, but please don't answer them yet. Suspense. All right, so I'll be exploring the potential implications of large language models on actuarial education and learning, as the title says. We did also include a test on an exam. So, what is a large language model? I'm sure that many in this room have already interacted with a large language model. Very simply put, artificial intelligence effectively uses algorithms to try and solve problems, normally of prediction and classification. Generative AI is then AI, which predicts content. So this content can be in the form of videos, of images, or in the case of large language models, text. So text is an input, text is an output, and that's how it works. And we investigated pretty much the OpenAI set of models, so ChatGPT and GPT-4, but of course there's a large range of large language models out there, all with different strengths and weaknesses. But for the purpose of this presentation, whenever I talk about ChatGPT or GPT-4, it is a large language model. So how good are existing LLMs? As always, in actuarial discussions, it depends. The graph on screen shows the estimated percentile at which ChatGPT in blue or GPT-4 in red would perform at compared to students who wrote the exam. So they were remarkably good at a range of different exercises. In particular, if I look at the uniform bar exam, their ChatGPT is not particularly good. It performs at the 10th percentile, whereas GPT-4 performs at the 90th percentile. So if you pass the bar exam in the US, you can practice law. So GPT-4, not being a lawyer, but GPT-4 could effectively practice law in the US, of course, if you ask it multiple choice questions, as the bar exam does. So ChatGPT is built on a similar architecture to GPT-4, but it's tuned more towards chat, whereas GPT-4 is tuned more towards test taking in a way. And a lot of the tests that are actually shown here are tests that in the initial feedback of how to improve GPT 3.5 to GPT-4, these tests, training information was effectively used from these tests to actually get to GPT-4. It doesn't perform as well at some other types of tests. So GRE writing is a graduate record examination, so it's sort of beginning university level equivalent, but it's not dissimilar to a communications exam. So where you actually require a bit of analytical reasoning, even though it's a written exam, and it doesn't perform very well with GPT-4 and ChatGPT performing at the 50th percentile. And then AP Calculus, GPT-4 performs also at the 50th percentile, so calculus doesn't really translate very well to text, and in particular ChatGPT has difficulties with a lot of numerical issues, and so there are a lot of difficulties here. So of course, like other papers have done in the past, we wanted to test how good could it be at performing against an actuarial exam, being one of the key sort of measurements we would use to, does it have any applications for education? So what do we do? Before I give you the answer, I'll just tell you how we assessed it. From our knowledge, previous tests against actuarial exams were basically just the exam script, and we wanted to improve it a little bit because prompt engineering, which you may have heard of, is effectively how we get the information that we need from LLMs. And just giving it the exam script, I think, is doing it a disservice if you're really testing it, because you're not giving it all of the information that it could possibly have to be able to pass the exam. And there are also a lot of unwritten rules in exams that potentially would be helpful. So we took the October 2022 F203 exam, and we tested ChatGPT against this. It's a non-numerical exam, so there are obviously numerical concepts generally at F203 level, but we chose an exam that doesn't really have a lot of numbers in the exam itself, mainly to choose an exam that's more applicable to the use of ChatGPT as a next word predictor. We curated the questions a bit, so information that we gave to ChatGPT is the number of distinct points that it needs to make per mark that was available, so that's normally 2 points per mark is the way that we typically mark exams, and then we also, in some cases, had to iterate a little bit to get the answer that we were looking for, right? So we're not testing can ChatGPT unprompted pass the exam. We're saying how much information is there in ChatGPT and how realistic can the answers that it give be to that of an actuarial student. We also provided some limited subject-specific information, so things that we knew were definitely not in the training data sets, such as the full text of APN 401, which does feature heavily in the exam from time to time, and we also gave it a short summary of the SAM SCR. We then marked the exam twice, and we discussed it like we do normal papers. So by a show of hands, who of you think that including all of this information and this prompt engineering, with all of the inclusion of all of this, do you think that ChatGPT passed the exam? So hands up for yes. Yeah, optimistic. The answer is very nearly, so very, very nearly, but not yet. So there's a very big difference in the marks that it gets with including additional prompt engineering in terms of curating the question and the inclusion of subject knowledge. And it's more or less at an FA level. So we were in the mid to high 50s in terms of this exam itself, in terms of the actual mark. We haven't yet tested it against GPT-4 because, well, what we'll talk about next year. But more specifically, we felt that the actuarial knowledge gap was a little bit big for GPT-4 to really make a big difference, but I'll get into that just now. I think that the big two criticisms that we would have about the actual final result, so including everything, was in some instances, the full context of the question is not used. So ChatGPT's working memory is not very high, and the answers that it gave were in some cases generic. So it does pick up on a lot of main issues, but also it's not able to really tailor it to the question that you're asking, which incidentally is not dissimilar to students with an FA grade. So students with an FA grade compared to students that pass, often you'll see a bit of a difference in how the answer is actually able to be tailored to the question itself. And then the other big criticism is that it's a bit of a hit or miss. So either it knows what you're talking about or it has no idea what you're talking about. So it's a bit of a binary outcome. So often it'll score very high on some questions and on other questions it'll score lower. So in that case, it's definitely lacking some actuarial knowledge, as it were. It's the base of knowledge that it's trained on is not really sufficient on what you would expect an actuarial student passing the exam to have. So we're all safe for now. You can breathe easily, but this time next year, maybe not. Okay, so I'll take you through a demo of what this looks like. So what we did here, you don't need to read everything, but just so you can see how we actually asked the question. So here is the entire context of the question itself. So basically the preamble to the question itself. And then ChatGPT is asked to recommend 5 different stress and scenario tests that could be prescribed to all companies to show the impact of climate change. And it provides some answers, which it's a little bit stochastic, so it doesn't give the same answers every time. when we actually did the exam test, the first answer that it gave us was 5 different natural disasters which could occur. In this actual iteration, it gives 5 different examples of stress tests that are applicable to climate change. We then look at the answer, we refine it, so then we ask it to provide information that's more tailored to the SAM SCR. And in doing this, we also provided a summary. So I don't show the summary that we give, but it's a summary of the SAM SCR, including the modules and how it stacks up a bit. And we then ask it to regenerate those 5 scenarios. And then it gives us answers that are very, very tailored to the SAM SCR modules itself. And then further, we iterate again and ask it to provide some information on what levers could be affected to really change this, to stress the scenario itself. So I'll just play the video and then give you some more information after that. Again, and ask it to provide some information on what levers could be affected to really change this. So you can see here that all of the answers that it's giving are now related to each of the BSCR modules, effectively, the information that was provided, and it gives like a plausible stress test that would be affected by climate change itself. This is also slowed down to like 40% of how fast it actually is, which is quite incredible. And the next iteration, we ask it to provide what levers to change under each scenario. So it basically iterates and it provides more information under each of these with the description of the lever itself. So you can see how asking for more distinct points under each of these would provide more exam-worthy points, marks, and you can switch out the life module stress for the non-life module stress depending on what you're talking about. And also how easy it is to add additional information. So the working memory of ChatGPT is somewhat low, so it's a bit limited, whereas GPT-4 has got a much bigger working memory. And there are a lot of methods that enable you to provide much bigger data sets as part of a pseudo-training data set so that the LLM improves. So at this point, I'd like to ask you a question. So if you could all turn to your polls, please. And the question I have for you is whether you believe AI tools will become a primary resource for actuarial students in the next decade. So your answers are absolutely. They'll be as essential as calculators are today. They'll play a role, but human intuition and judgment will remain primary. AI might become a crutch, potentially reducing the rigor of actuarial training, or that it's too soon to predict and the trajectory of AI's role in education is still uncertain. Yeah, so I think a priori I would have leaned towards the second one myself, so I think this is the most likely outcome. I don't think that they won't be used, so I think probably A is also very valid. It probably will be, in some ways, essential. So I think, shout out to the guys at Think Actuary are already doing something in this vein, and I believe that they're just going to become better and better as these LLMs become more useful. So yeah, very interesting. Thanks. So now I'll take you through what we think could be useful for students in the context of ChatGPT. So some of these have more or less applicability depending on how much knowledge you actually need from the LLM itself. The first one is writing practice. So this is, I think, probably the lowest hanging fruit where LLMs could be extremely useful. So a lot of students writing the exam still do not express themselves in a way that enables marks to be easily allocated to them. This is across the board, I would say, coupled with the fact that, for better or worse, English is the de facto language of business in South Africa. A lot of actuarial students come from homes that don't have English as the primary language. They don't necessarily get the opportunity to improve their English writing too much throughout university. And you can introduce LLM tools very early on to enable people to write better, to enable people to express themselves better in English. And this is being done in classrooms across the world in many, many different areas. And then to help me write as an actuary tool, I think all we would need is some excerpts of actuarial articles to enable people to actually be able to use ChatGPT as a way to compare their writing to actuarial style to improve their professional writing. So I think this is a low-hanging fruit and is immediately useful. It doesn't even require that much actuarial knowledge for ChatGPT to hold itself. So as a study partner, this is potentially a big one as well. So the few different areas here. So I think just as a concept reference or to remind you of formulas or techniques, I think it definitely could be used as a high-level guide. So let's say you're working in reserving and you want some pricing concepts to be reminded of. You could use it as that, but that is predicated on it actually having the actual knowledge to be able to share with you. You could present specific problems or scenarios to ChatGPT, and it could help you actually, how do you break down this problem into smaller manageable chunks? And then I think probably an underrated one is that studying can be very lonely and it can be very intense and very stressful. And I think having, in a way, someone to discuss things with could be super helpful, especially because senior actuaries are not always available to kind of guide you along the process. And for example, to identify weaknesses that you should know before going an exam, what potential weaknesses you have and how you can improve on those, and kind of use it as a study partner. So you can see it as a form of free counseling. I don't think that it should replace human interaction, of course, but I do think that the potential is massive here. Interestingly, Khan Academy has got a tutor partner that they've built on the back of ChatGPT that helps students, of course, not at such a high level, but high school students to actually have interactions and have more interesting study sessions as well. And then practice questions. So my hope is that in future, it could generate practice questions that you could do instead of just having a limited number of past exam papers. And it wouldn't even necessarily have to be exam paper level questions. It could just be questions that it has a reference, similar to what Think Actuary does, has a reference of questions that it keeps building the more information that it has. So I do think these are very powerful potential uses. And I would be very interested to know what other uses you think there could be. So then we can move on to the next polling question, which I hope you haven't already answered, because maybe I've changed your mind about this one in the last 2 minutes, but if not, that's okay. So the question that I have is, assuming that AI tools are indeed integrated into actual coursework, what do you believe will be the most significant impact on students? So your options are A, enhanced personalization, allowing students to learn at their own pace; B, increased dependence on technology, potentially weakening foundational skills; C, a shift towards real-world simulations and case studies; or D, a blended learning approach optimizing the best of AI and traditional methods. So I think it's very interesting that 30% nearly feel that the dependence on technology will weaken skills. So it's definitely possible that not having as much of the actuarial knowledge inside our heads could potentially cause a major weakening, but I don't think that's the most likely, actually. I think that handling the technology in future will make enhanced personalization very, very possible, and I also believe that a blended learning approach with human involvement will become very powerful. Okay, so there's also potential ways that ChatGPT could help examiners. And the generating questions is an interesting one. And I think it's quite plausible, actually, that we could get ideas for exam papers from ChatGPT, or at least ways in which we could enhance the ideas that we already have. So I think potentially, at least in F203, which I think I'm allowed to talk about being involved in it, we sometimes ask questions that are not creative enough, and potentially, if you have an idea, you could ask ChatGPT to sort of help with that question. There's a big question on the ethics side of things, which I'll touch on now. Validating questions, I think, is super powerful. It's probably the hardest part of setting papers, is actually reducing the ambiguity in the question and getting an answer that you want. Guinea pigs already reduce some of that risk, but given the answers that we actually see in F203 exams, it's clear that in some cases ambiguity is not completely removed. And we already saw this in the examination test, is that sometimes ChatGPT can give you answers which are actually quite good interpretations of the questions, even though they weren't intended. So having that iteration could potentially help. And I don't feel that they're really particularly well suited to marking exams at the moment, unfortunately, but they could definitely be used for enhancing memos and improving the way that memos are structured, especially because students really learn from them a lot, and sometimes the memos are not as detailed and as clear as they could be. On the marking front, I believe it's because of the lack of understanding of what it's saying, so it's not able to compare text that has the same meaning but has a different text, but my understanding of it is quite limited, so I'm not sure if that's the real reason, but having done a couple of tests on it, I can say that it's not very good at marking, it's not very good at counting, adding up how many marks it can give even itself. And with a bit of iteration, it does get a bit better, but it doesn't really solve the problem. So there are obviously considerations and challenges, like with any new technology. I don't think these are really exclusive to AI. Probably AI has some unique ones. So I think Cesar spoke about this yesterday in terms of its ability to hallucinate, in terms of its ability to come up with stuff that's always accurate. So I don't feel that you should use it in cases where it has to be correct, but also I don't really see this as a very big risk, because the actuarial review process means we need to look at any piece of information that we're given and decide for ourselves whether that's right. So it's definitely important that most of the information that it gives you, if you're using it for academic purposes, is correct, but it doesn't mean that we should take everything that it tells us at face value, just like you shouldn't take anything that any actuary tells you at face value, I would say. I don't know whether it really is public, but I think we should treat any information that you share with the LLM as public information. So there is some question about how that information is used, so anything that's confidential that you wouldn't want to share publicly, I don't think that you should share with the LLM. Bias, of course, because there's bias in training data, so to the extent that it's been trained on a certain set of data, it's very likely to replicate those biases. ChatGPT doesn't really have that many safeguards against it, whereas GPT-4 does have a few bias safeguards, but it does become a trade-off of like how usable it is versus how correct or non-biased it is. And then alignment has got a meaning in the AI world, so basically does the AI machine do what you tell it to do? But the alignment challenge for me is more, as a profession, how do we decide how to let these into our classrooms and examinations, if at all? So I think we can use them individually as individual actuaries, or we could, as a profession, decide that we want to create some sort of LLM that has got much more usability. And so I kind of see it like this, which is there is some overlap between actuarial information that ChatGPT has, but ChatGPT was trained at the end of 2021 on the internet at large. So actuarial syllabus does exist in parts on the internet to some degree, accidentally, but that information is not easily accessible, it's not easily queryable, and it doesn't know that you're asking for actuarial answers all of the time. So there's not that much overlap at the moment, and for this to truly become very powerful, it would need the profession to decide that we're going to come up with a way to include regulation, to include industry standards, and potentially to include actuarial syllabi from the beginning to the end in some sort of proprietary LLM that could potentially be queried. Especially because all of the information is, all of the examinations at least, are rather cumulative rather than individual. So it's very important what came before, and you can't really pass F103 without F10 risk, whatever theory that one is, and you can't pass F203 without F103. And so you probably also can't pass any of the F200 exams without communications, or any of the F100 exams without communications, unless you're quite lucky. So it's very important that if we want to harness the full power of these, we need to decide what we're actually going to do, if anything, as a profession, to consider this. So in closing, I don't believe that this is true. So I think that it's clear that they're super powerful. Machines and LLMs have big potential to change the way that we learn about things and potentially reduce some of the knowledge burden as well at times. But they're next word predictors. They predict the next word in a sentence, as it were, and they don't really replicate an actuary in a box. And besides that, I don't believe that an actuary is in the knowledge, but rather in the application. So my view, sticking my neck out, I don't believe that our jobs are at risk in the near term. I believe that we can use them to optimize and make our jobs more efficient in some instances. I do believe that for educational purposes, they can improve communication, definitely already now. And if you haven't used an LLM already, I suggest you try it out. You could be surprised, you could be amazed, you could be disappointed depending on your expectations. But I think that they're here to stay. And so if we can use them to improve our lives or improve education, then I think any additional input is a win. So thank you, and looking forward to hearing your views.
Thanks, Max. I think perhaps we have time for one question. We are at the closing, so down there.
Isn't the challenge then to the examiners to set an exam that AI will fail?
Hi, thanks for that, Max. I just think it's probably useful to reflect on how people learn. I think AI is going to be super useful as a tool, but it could be very destructive in the learning process. And we've seen this a number of times at WITS. So the School of Mathematics a couple of years ago introduced a Pearson laboratory where there's a huge database of questions and people are set questions. And they're meant to struggle with it to learn how to do it. But if you get it wrong twice, on the third time it gives you the answer. So students default to putting in a couple of wrong answers first to get the solution and try to learn from it. And there's a very big danger that people will use the material to try and learn the exam and not the syllabus. And there's a limited amount of time. So we're changing all our syllabi, and we do this continually. We changed syllabus leading into the COVID pandemic, and now we've learned that some of the things we thought would work, we're going to change again, particularly on the stats side. But the reality is that the students have a limited amount of time, and we've got to prioritize what they do. And anything that gives them more volume may be counterproductive because it doesn't get them to grapple with the key concepts and the key learnings. And so if AI allows people to do a myriad of practice without learning the base content, it's a bit like what's happened in the school system. The quality of students coming out of a school system has declined enormously not in terms of intelligence, but in terms of ability to do well at university. And we have to spend, at this stage, almost 9 months unteaching them what they learned wrongly at school, because they learned generally to answer an exam, they learn generally around a volume technique, they learn generally without understanding. And so we've got to be really certain that what we do is going to leave people with a residual skill that comes from struggling with the content, and not replace it by saying, you no longer need to struggle, this can be done much faster, and expect people to have the same judgment and skill at the end. And that's going to be the challenge as we integrate the tool into our learning and into our education process, that it doesn't leave us with a chat GPT that is actually smarter than the actuarial student, because we've now relied too heavily on that interaction with a high volume, high processing capability. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Very valuable.
Great. Thanks, everyone. That brings us to the end of our convention until the party tonight, if you'll be attending. Thank you to all of you for attending the 50th ASA convention, and a special thanks to my co-host Tapfuma for a fantastic 2 days. We will be closing with a video from both our outgoing president and incoming president, so please stick around just to watch that closing video.
Gone to the end of the 50th ASA convention in a year where ASA celebrates its 75th anniversary. How special is that? I think we can all agree it was a great convention with great papers, debates and plenary sessions. Thanks to all that attended and presented. Your participation and involvement made this event so much more special and engaging. As such, I also thank the organizing committee and Africa Agenda for putting it all together. Planning an event like this takes months. We appreciate the effort and the time put in to get us here. In particular, I thank Roxanne, the chair of the committee, the respective leads of the various work streams, Catherine, Chris, Logan and Simon, the rest of the committee and the staff of the ASA office under the leadership of Michelle. You've done a sterling job. Costa, as incoming president, I'm sure you also have something to say.
Thank you, Chart. I agree. It's been an absolutely brilliant convention. We've seen some great and very respectful debates. We've seen some thought-provoking papers, and we've seen some excellent presentations. Thank you to all of you that have made this possible and have made this happen. May the next 75 years see us not only lead, adapt, and thrive, but also lead with foresight, relevance, and innovation. Let's carry forward the legacy of excellence, commitment, and collaboration, ensuring our profession remains at the forefront of shaping a secure and prosperous future. Let's remain relevant to every South African out there. We're ending the convention in style, with cocktails and a dinner event at the Aurum this evening. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody that has purchased their tickets this evening. Bring your dancing shoes. I have no doubt we're going to have a lot of fun. The convention would also not have been possible without our sponsors and exhibitors. I'd like to thank you all for the invaluable contribution you have made in making this convention the success that it has. I'm not going to read out all the names, but you can see them all on the slide. Without your support, this would not have been possible. Thank you once again. I look forward to seeing everybody next year in Cape Town. Until then, take care, be safe, and have a wonderful end to the year. Thank you.